She stood behind the counter, filing her nails, barely glancing up when the older black man politely asked for help. "Find it yourself," she muttered, never breaking rhythm. No one knew he was the founder. No one noticed his hands trembling, not in anger, but in memory, because decades ago, his mother was treated the exact same way, in a place just like this. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. Walter Daniels pulled his collar up as the breeze picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of fried food and pine from the corner vendor across the street. The awning above morning shine marked flapped slightly in the wind, sun-bleached and tired from too many seasons. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The soft chime above the door barely made a sound. A bell that had rung 1,000 times now seemed to whisper instead of announce. Walter walked past the display of snack chips and soda bottles stacked in bright, clashing colors. His steps were steady but unhurried. There was a particular quiet in how he moved, like someone who had learned long ago that rushing didn't get you noticed. Not in the way that mattered. He scanned the shelves with calm eyes, looking for the bottle of vitamin C his wife had asked for that morning. It should have been in aisle 4. Top shelf, at least. That's where he remembered it from his last visit 6 months ago. But the shelves had been rearranged since then, and now everything felt unfamiliar. At the checkout counter, a young woman sat hunched over her phone, one earbud dangling, the other tucked in. Shelby Turner. Her nails were long, lacquered in a pale pink polish that shimmered slightly under the overhead lights. She moved a small metal file across the curve of her thumbnail with casual precision, eyes never leaving her screen. Walter stepped closer, cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me, miss," he said, voice low and courteous. "Would you mind helping me find something?" She didn't look up, still filing, still watching. "I'm kinda busy," she muttered. "Just look around. It's not that hard." Walter paused, his fingers flexed slightly at his side. Across the store, an elderly man sat by the window with a coffee cup half full and a newspaper unopened. He glanced up for just a moment, met Walter's eyes, then looked away. No words, no nod, just that small flicker of recognition that something impolite had happened, and it would be best not to get involved. Walter managed a polite nod to Shelby, though she never saw it. He turned away, eyes scanning the shelves again with a bit less intention now, more as a gesture of politeness to a room that had none to spare. And then his gaze fell on her hand. The file, the nail, the soft repetition of movement. He saw it clearly, an echo from decades ago. Another woman behind another counter, her hand doing the exact same thing while a black woman in a worn dress asked for aspirin and was told, "I'm busy." That memory had faded over the years, but now it returned, vivid and unwelcome, like an old injury aching before the rain. Walter walked slowly toward the exit, not because he was old, but because some memories made your legs heavy. He nodded again at no one in particular and stepped back into the light. Outside, the breeze had turned warmer. Children ran past with ice cream melting down their fingers. Across the street, someone honked impatiently at a stop sign. The world moved on, unaware that something small, but not insignificant, had just happened. He adjusted his hat, more from habit than need, and thought of his wife waiting at home. She wouldn't mind that he came back without the vitamins. But he minded, and as he stood on the curb, watching the morning shine sign sway just a little in the wind, he realized it wasn't the rudeness that stung. It was the familiarity, the way it felt like nothing had changed after all these years. He didn't say a word as he walked back to his car. But inside, something had shifted, something small, like a loose thread starting to tug from the edge of a tightly woven life. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. And sometimes, that hurt more. The garage light buzzed above Walter Daniels as he sat quietly behind the wheel. Engine off, door halfway shut. He hadn't moved since pulling in. The neighborhood was calm, sprinklers ticking in distant yards, the faint yip of a small dog, someone's television echoing through an open window. But inside the car, it was still, heavy. His hands rested on the steering wheel, rough with years of use, thick-knuckled. veins risen like quiet reminders of time. His right thumb brushed over a small scar near the base of his palm. He hadn't noticed it in years. Funny how some wounds only ask to be seen when something else had started to ache. In the silence, he remembered the drugstore in Birmingham. 1962. He couldn't have been older than 12. His mother had stood in front of the counter, hat neatly pinned, hands folded politely, and asked for cough drops. The woman behind the counter, white blouse pressed and lips red as stop signs, had smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "We're closed," she'd said. The sign on the door had read otherwise. That moment hadn't come crashing back to him today. It had crept in, slow, familiar, triggered not by words, but by something smaller, a gesture, a nail file, a hand that moved like history repeating itself without even realizing. Walter finally opened the car door and stepped out. The night air wrapped around him, cooler than it had been earlier. His knees ached more than usual. Age didn't just come with time, it came with weight. Invisible weight. Inside, the house smelled of cornbread and rosemary. Mildred had cooked again, even though he'd told her to rest. She was sitting in the den, watching an old western, the kind where justice was always black and white, and men never needed to explain why they were angry. "You all right?" she asked, eyes not leaving the screen. He murmured, offering a tired smile she didn't believe. He kissed the top of her head and moved to his study. He closed the door gently behind him and sat at the oak desk that had once belonged to his father. The lamp cast a warm, buttery glow across scattered papers. He pulled out a manila folder, employee records from the Charleston branch. He flipped through them until he found Shelby Turner's name. There it was, 3 minor complaints. Rudeness, neglect, tone, all marked, resolved, no write-ups, no formal consequences. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Morning Shine had been built with a promise in mind, not just convenience or cleanliness. It was supposed to be the kind of place his mother could have walked into and been treated like she mattered. Like anyone mattered. That had been the whole point. Now here he was, watching that same quiet dismissal live on under his roof. And he'd seen it not as a CEO, but as a customer. As a black man, as a son. He opened the drawer beside him. Buried under years of correspondence and ink-stained receipts was the photo. He didn't need to look at it, but he did. His mother stood at the drugstore counter. Posture perfect, a woman of dignity. Behind the counter, a clerk, mid-motion, file in hand, her eyes somewhere else entirely. The picture had been taken from outside, through the glass. That's why it felt so distant. That's why it felt so familiar. He ran a thumb across the edge of the photo and exhaled slowly. Down the hall, he could hear Mildred laughing softly at something on TV. And for a moment, he envied the clarity of those black and white cowboys, how they always knew who the villain was. How their battles ended before the credits rolled. But life wasn't a western. It was shelves rearranged without notice. Policies upheld without heart. Apologies left unspoken for decades. He slid the photo back into the drawer. But the weight of it stayed in his chest. What do you do when the thing you built to fix the world becomes part of the reason it's still broken? Walter didn't have an answer. But he knew this. Tomorrow, he would walk into Morning Shine not as a man looking for vitamins, but as the man who'd written the first page of its mission. And if that page had been ignored, maybe it was time to read it out loud. He reached to turn off the lamp but paused. His hand hovered mid-air, fingers trembling just slightly. Sometimes, silence could hide things. And sometimes, it just gave them room to grow. Walter arrived just past 9, pulling his Cadillac up beside the side entrance where the delivery trucks usually unloaded. The car's deep maroon finish reflected the morning sun like a memory, one that had been waxed and preserved but never quite erased. He wore a dark suit today, simple and clean, but the weight of it wasn't in the fabric, it was in the intention. A young stockboy paused mid-step as he noticed the car, his brows tightening in confusion. Walter offered a soft nod, then moved forward. Every step felt deliberate. He didn't walk like a man in charge. He walked like a man returning to a place that had forgotten why it was built in the first place. Linda Mayfield spotted him from across the store floor and nearly dropped the clipboard in her hands. Her heels clacked hurriedly as she approached. the practiced smile on her face faltering for just a second. "Mr. Daniels, sir, we weren't expecting." Walter raised a hand gently. Not to stop her, but to quiet everything. "Just here to observe, Linda," he said, his voice measured. "Carry on." Shelby Turner was at the register. Upright now, though still distant, her makeup was more polished today. The earbuds were gone, the phone nowhere in sight. But posture could only hide so much. Walter approached slowly, standing exactly where he'd stood the day before, beside the scratch on the linoleum floor and the tiny loose thread on the corner of the counter. He looked at her, not with scrutiny, but with the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable, because it asked for honesty without demanding it. "Good morning," he said. "I'm looking for vitamin C tablets. Could you point me in the right direction?" Shelby's jaw tensed. Her eyes flicked toward Linda, who hovered nearby. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was smaller than yesterday's, almost swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator near the dairy section. They're in aisle 3. Top shelf." Walter nodded, then waited. Shelby blinked. Her fingers twitched at her side, as though remembering the motion of the nail file. She seemed to search his face for something. Anger. Perhaps. Accusation. But he offered neither. Behind them, a quiet murmur had settled over the store. A few customers looked up from their shopping carts. One elderly man by the seating area near the coffee machine leaned forward slightly, squinting. Raymond Cortez, regular customer, widower, Army veteran. Linda stepped closer. "Mr. Daniels," she began, her voice clipped, trying to manage the air in the room. Walter didn't look at her. Instead, he turned back to Shelby and said, calmly, "Yesterday must have been a long shift. But sometimes how we speak, how we choose not to see someone, is louder than any words." Shelby swallowed hard. Her eyes shifted again, this time toward the floor. The tips of her ears turned red. Silence stretched. It wasn't heavy. It was charged, like the air before a storm. And then, from the seating area, Raymond cleared his throat. "I was here," he said, his voice cracked slightly from age, but not from doubt. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push, just asked for help. "You told him to look himself." Shelby's head snapped toward him, her expression a mix of surprise and shame. Raymond shrugged gently. "Didn't say nothing yesterday. Guess I thought it wasn't my place. But I'm tired of thinking that way." Walter didn't respond right away. He watched Shelby's face, not to judge, but to listen without words. He'd seen that look before. Not in her, but in dozens of people over the years. People who realized too late that indifference had a weight all its own. Linda tried to shift the attention back, her voice a pitch too high. "Why don't we all just?" But it was too late for distraction. The moment had happened. It had landed. Shelby lowered her gaze and whispered something only she could hear. Maybe it was sorry. Maybe it was just her own name. As if reminding herself who she was supposed to be. Walter didn't ask her to repeat it. He simply offered a soft nod and turned to leave. But even as he stepped away, the storm inside him didn't settle. Because what troubled him most wasn't her attitude, or even the memory it stirred. It was the question he couldn't shake. If the people who worked for him didn't understand what Morning Shine stood for, then what exactly had he spent a lifetime building? The answer didn't come with a clipboard or a policy revision. It came with a knot in his chest that no suit could smooth over. And as he walked past the display of canned soups and discount batteries, he knew this wasn't over. Some moments ask for reflection. Others demand change. This was both. The back room of the Morning Shine Mart had never hosted anything more consequential than expired inventory audits or birthday cakes from the local grocery store. The chairs were mismatched, 2 plastic folding seats, a couple of swiveling stools, and one with a chipped arm that someone always tried to avoid. But this afternoon, they were all occupied. The door had been left ajar. Yet the air inside felt heavy, like it had braced itself for something it didn't know how to hold. Walter Daniels stood at the front, not behind the folding table like a manager would, but to the side of it. No PowerPoint, no clipboard, just a small folded photograph in his pocket and something that had sat on his chest for too many decades. Linda Mayfield stood a pace behind him, her hands clasped, her face carefully composed. She had a practiced expression she wore during complaints, corporate audits, and awkward confrontations between staff. But today, she wore it like armor, not confidence. Shelby Turner was in the last row. Her arms were crossed, but her shoulders had dipped. She didn't look up, not once. Walter began without clearing his throat. The story didn't need a dramatic opening. It had been waiting too long to be told. I opened Morning Shine, he said, because of a pharmacy in Birmingham. A Tuesday afternoon in the summer of '62. My mother was turned away for a bottle of cough syrup because someone decided she didn't look like she could pay. The room didn't shift, but something in the way Olivia, seated near the side, tilted forward slightly, suggested they were listening differently now. Walter continued. She didn't raise her voice, didn't ask for a manager. She walked out, came home, and poured hot water over lemon because it was all we had. He reached into his coat pocket and slowly unfolded the photo. The edges had curled from time and the corners wore the memory of many revisits. This, he said softly, was taken by a passerby. Someone who saw her, who wanted someone else to see her. 2. He held the photo where they could all see. In it, his mother stood still, hands folded in front of her, a quiet dignity in her stance. Behind her, through the pharmacy glass, the employee, a young white woman, was turned away, mid-motion, filing her nails, not looking, not listening, just filing. Shelby's breath caught, too faint to be heard but loud enough to shift the air around her. Walter's voice dropped slightly. That hand, that motion, that dismissal, it has a way of staying with you. You forget the words, but not how small it made someone feel. Linda's eyes flicked to Shelby but said nothing. This, Walter added, wasn't just about service. It was about visibility, about being seen. So when I started this business, I didn't want it to be just clean shelves and fast checkouts. I wanted it to be a place where no one felt invisible. Silence bloomed, not the tense kind, the kind that asks you to measure yourself quietly. Then a voice, soft and unsure, cracked through the stillness. I saw it too. Olivia, she was 22, still in college, working part-time. She glanced briefly at Shelby, then back to Walter. Yesterday, I heard how she spoke to you. I should have said something, but I didn't want to cause drama. Walter gave her a small, warm nod, saying nothing doesn't make you wrong. He said, but if we stay quiet long enough, we forget how to speak up. Shelby looked up for the first time. Her eyes were shiny, but dry, not defensive, not angry, just startled, maybe, by how much a single moment could reflect so many others. The room didn't erupt into debate or excuses. No corporate jargon, no talk of retraining. Shelby rose slowly from her chair. No one stopped her. She walked out with careful steps, like she wasn't sure if the floor would stay steady beneath her. Linda moved slightly, but Walter held up a hand again. Let her go. That gesture said, not as punishment, but as pause. Olivia watched Shelby's back until the door shut behind her. Then she looked at Walter again. And this time, her expression had changed. She wasn't just seeing the man in the suit. She was seeing the boy who'd once watched his mother be turned away. She was seeing the reason for all of it. And in that moment, she decided she wouldn't be silent next time. Because sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest truths. 2 days passed like dust settling after a sudden breeze, nothing dramatic. But something had shifted. Morning Shine Mart looked the same from the outside. Cars still pulled into the modest parking lot. The automatic doors still hummed open and shut like nothing inside had changed. But inside, there was a quiet hesitation in how the employees moved. A pause that hadn't existed before. Like they were listening for something that hadn't been said yet. Walter didn't push. He let the store breathe on its own. Didn't speak much during his quiet visits that week. He greeted Olivia with a nod, acknowledged Linda's uncertain glances, and stood by the vitamin aisle more than once, not because he needed anything, but because standing still sometimes made people notice what they'd been avoiding. Then, that Thursday, he called for a closed-door staff meeting. No agenda, no memos, no manager-led small talk to soften the edges. Just a room full of people who had seen too much, or not enough, and were finally being asked to sit with it. Linda looked flustered from the start. She kept smoothing her skirt, checking her watch, then reaching for the clipboard she never used. Shelby wasn't present. She'd called in that morning. Personal leave, the note said. Walter didn't question it. Instead, he walked to the front of the room, held up a small remote, and clicked the monitor awake. A video played, silent, clear. Shelby behind the counter, filing her nails. Walter approaching. His voice couldn't be heard, but his lips moved with quiet precision. Her head didn't turn. She pointed lazily, eyes on her phone. Walter nodded and stepped back. The image froze there. No replay, no dramatic commentary. Just that image, him. Turned away, shoulders drawn in. Her, unchanged. Walter looked out at the room. Some employees stared at the screen, others at the floor. Olivia sat very still, her hands knotted in her lap. He spoke gently. Nobody leaked this. No one was punished. But I wanted you to see what we all missed, not just her reaction, but the silence around it. He turned back toward the image, still paused mid-scene. That was me, but it could have been anyone. And I want to ask you something, not as employees, but as people. He let the moment stretch, long enough for it to become uncomfortable. If that had been your mother, he asked, and someone had spoken to her like that, how would you feel? Nobody answered. They didn't have to, because the truth had already thickened in the room, like humidity before a storm, the kind that settles in your bones and stays even after the skies clear. Linda cleared her throat, tried to speak, then stopped. She reached for her clipboard again, then thought better of it. No one moved, and then, as if cued by silence itself, the bell above the front door rang. It wasn't a dramatic entrance, just a man, older, slower, walking with the careful purpose of someone who had carried many regrets and had finally found the right one to lay down. Raymond Cortez. He didn't say a word, just nodded once to Olivia, who returned the nod like something quiet had passed between them, and walked straight to Walter, holding out a white envelope. Walter took it, surprised. The edges were slightly worn, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet, lined paper, blue ink, 1962. It read, I stood 2 blocks away from your mother. I saw what happened. I didn't step in, didn't say a word. It was a different time, but not a different truth. I've regretted that day for 60 years. I can't go back, but I can be different now. That's why I spoke up. I didn't want silence to win twice. R.C. Walter's throat tightened. He folded the letter carefully, as if it might bruise. There was nothing performative in Raymond's presence. No grandstanding. Just a man who had once stayed quiet and had decided he wouldn't let history echo unchecked. Walter looked up, met his gaze. They didn't smile. They didn't nod again. Some acknowledgments are too sacred for gestures. And in that room, with a paused screen and a circle of people beginning to understand the weight of a moment, Walter felt something shift, not just around him, but inside. Not relief, not justice, but the slow, steady reassurance that he was no longer standing alone. And sometimes, that was enough to begin again. The meeting room inside the Charleston regional office didn't carry the warmth of a community store. It was sleek, windowless, with ergonomic chairs and a faint scent of lemon disinfectant that clung too tightly to the air. On the wall, a framed mission statement, crisp Helvetica over a background of smiling employees, promised respect, integrity, community. Linda Mayfield stood at the head of the table, her voice steady, but her words came faster than usual, as if she was trying to outrun something unnamed. I'm not here to cause trouble, she began, but I believe Mr. Daniels is allowing personal emotion to color his leadership. There were 7 other supervisors present, 4 from other morning shine districts. Some sat upright, attentive, others slouched, arms folded. None made direct eye contact with Linda, but none interrupted her either. She continued, this video, this conversation, it's becoming disruptive. The staff is confused. Customers are talking. There are whispers of favoritism, fear, and uncertainty. And while I respect Mr. Daniels immensely, I worry that by focusing so heavily on one incident, he's unintentionally destabilizing our stores. A pause. Then softly, someone across the table said, if he wasn't the CEO, would we even be talking about this? A few heads nodded. A middle-aged man in a gray sweater added, I mean, let's be honest, people are rude every day. We don't hold staff meetings over it. Another voice, He's making it personal. It's about his mom. It's not about the business. Linda smiled tightly, like she had expected these comments. Had rehearsed her neutrality. Then someone else spoke. Younger. Newer. A woman whose badge read, Donnie, Augusta. She didn't look at Linda. She looked at the table. But maybe, she said, that's the problem. That we've been calling it, just customer service, for so long. We forgot there's a person on the other side of the counter. Silence. Then, not the heavy kind, but the kind that lands softly, asking to be considered. Walter wasn't at the meeting. He was sitting in his office, looking out the window where sunlight hit the pavement in slanted gold. On his desk, a weathered leather folder lay open, the photograph of his mother inside. He didn't react to the reports from Linda, didn't ask for minutes from the meeting. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. The subject line was simple: why we exist. The email was sent to every Morning Shine inbox, over 300 stores. Every manager, every cashier, every night stalker. It began without greeting. I founded Morning Shine not to sell toothpaste or canned beans, he wrote, but because of one afternoon in 1962, when a woman I loved was made to feel like she didn't belong. He didn't mention his mother by name. He didn't need to. I built these stores so no one would ever be invisible again. I believed we could create a place where listening mattered more than speed. Where decency wasn't a policy, it was a practice. He then linked a short video, just 18 seconds. It showed Shelby's dismissal, and then, Raymond Cortez, standing up with slow determination, saying, doesn't matter who he is. He deserves to be heard. No music, no captions, just that. The final paragraph read, if one Morning Shine employee forgets how to listen, we all forget why we are here. If our walls echo with silence where there should have been compassion, then we've lost something more valuable than any sale. We've lost who we said we were. And he signed it, Walter Daniels, founder. The email went out at 2:17 p.m. By 2:26, it had been forwarded, quoted, and screenshotted over 1,000 times. Some employees sat in break rooms reading it silently. Others wiped their eyes behind register counters. Managers printed it and taped it to office walls. And then came the second message. A meeting was being called. Not a routine quarterly gathering. Not a holiday update. A full system virtual assembly. For the first time in 2 decades, Walter Daniels would not speak as CEO, but as a man with questions for the system he had spent a lifetime building. And suddenly, people weren't just preparing for a meeting. They were preparing to be asked, what kind of silence are you willing to carry? It was the first time in 19 years that Walter Daniels asked everyone to stop. Not just in one store. Not just in Charleston. Across 300 locations, scanners were paused. Shift changes were delayed. Even the automated register announcements went silent. For 1 hour, Morning Shine Mart went still. The staff called it the hour of listening. On the screen of each break room television, each conference room monitor, even the back office desktops behind locked stockroom doors, Walter appeared. No background banners. No company logo. Just him. A small stage, an old wooden stool, and a folding table with a single black and white photo resting on top. He didn't sit. He didn't read a script. He started with a breath. When I was 9, Walter said, my mother walked me to the corner store to buy cough syrup. She didn't have a fancy coat. We didn't have the money for one. And the clerk never looked her in the eye. Never said a word, just pointed to the sign that said, we reserve the right to refuse service. He lifted the photo gently, as if even after all these years, it still needed careful handling. This was taken 10 minutes later. He said, a neighbor had a camera. That's her, my mom, standing outside that store, holding nothing. The clerk inside was painting her nails. He didn't mention Shelby, or Linda, or Charleston, but the silence on the call was heavier than any accusation. Walter looked down at his hands, those same hands that built the company. The same ones that once pushed shopping carts in the summer heat as a teen. That wrote checks for the first storefront. That now trembled just enough to betray age but not conviction. I built Morning Shine because I thought we could do better. Not perfect, but better. That maybe we could build a place where nobody got to feel like they were less than human just because they walked in tired. Or poor, or different. He paused. I thought I had succeeded. In Nevada, Anna's screen blinked to life. She wore the morning shine vest. Her voice was steady, but her lips pressed together like they were holding back too much. I'm Anna. I work in Henderson, she said. I wear a headscarf. I've been ignored at registers. Laughed at behind my back. Not always here, but it hurts just the same. And we never talk about it. Until now. Her image remained still, and then another screen lit up. I'm Dave, Tucson. My mom didn't speak English. They once told her to learn the language or stop coming in. That was 15 years ago. I still remember her face. And then another. And another. Stories spilled, not as accusations, but as confessions, not as rebellion, but release. It was as if Walter's honesty had turned on a faucet long sealed shut. One after another, the little screens spoke. No one kept time. Linda sat in the back corner of the Charleston office, her hands in her lap. She hadn't touched her phone. Her posture had shrunk somehow. The tight, efficient lines of her body now curled inward. She didn't look defiant. She looked small. She wasn't named, but her presence felt seen. The meeting, if you could call it that, had no agenda, no vote, no next steps. But something shifted. Near the end, a quiet stir near the entrance to the Charleston office. Raymond Cortez. No badge, no invitation, just a man with a weathered coat, a little worn at the cuffs, and eyes that had seen more than most. He didn't say anything. He walked in, nodded once, and stood in the back. Walter saw him, and after a long moment, raised his hand slightly, an invitation, not a command. Raymond stepped forward, slow but steady, and climbed onto the small platform. He didn't speak either. They stood side by side, one hand holding the past in a photo, the other hand simply hanging loose. Honest. Two men, one black, one white, one who once stayed silent, one who no longer could. And that moment, wordless, weighty, full, was somehow louder than anything spoken. Because justice, when real, rarely needs to shout. It just needs to be heard. The morning Shelby left. She didn't tell anyone. Not Linda, not even Olivia. One day, her locker was empty, her name tag gone. In its place sat a note, no address, no signature, just a few words written in simple, slanted script. I'm sorry, and thank you, for not making me feel like I was beyond redemption. Walter read it twice, maybe 3 times, then folded it neatly and slid it into the pocket of his coat. Just above his heart. No one asked where she'd gone. In retail, people disappear all the time. But this wasn't one of those quiet resignations. This was someone stepping out of a moment they'd frozen in, and trying to thaw. Somewhere new. A few weeks later, Morning Shine launched something it had never done before, not a sale. Not a new store opening. But a training program with no mention of margins or customer retention. They called it One Voice. The tagline was printed on soft blue folders. One voice can change a room. One heart can shift a culture. It wasn't mandatory, but the waiting list to join stretched longer than they expected. Olivia, 22, still learning the right way to tie the lanyard so it didn't twist, volunteered to be the first program led. She didn't say much when Walter asked her why. Just that quiet smile of someone who'd been watching from the edges for too long. I was once the one who didn't speak, she said, so I figured it made sense to start by listening. The pilot program began in Atlanta, inside a modest Morning Shine tucked between a laundromat and an old dentist's office. No grand banners, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just a folding table, a coffee pot, and 12 employees willing to learn something that couldn't be measured on a spreadsheet. Raymond showed up on the 3rd day. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't carry notes. He just walked in with that slow, deliberate step of a man who's seen time fold and unfold in front of him too many times to rush. When Olivia introduced him, she didn't use his last name. Just, Mr. Raymond, the way someone might say, uncle, or pastor, with a tone of quiet reverence. He sat, cleared his throat, and told them a story. Not about Walter, not even about Morning Shine, but about a bus stop. In 1964, where he once stood next to a woman who got ignored by the driver 3 times in a row. Her only offense? Her skin, her silence. He told them how silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's survival, and how survival, when turned into policy, becomes cruelty dressed up in routine. The room stayed quiet for a long time after he finished. No questions, no clapping, just the soft scrape of a chair as someone leaned forward. Maybe to hear him better. Maybe just to sit with the weight of it all. Back at headquarters, Walter stood in the hallway outside the executive conference room, holding the same photograph he'd carried for decades. The edges were frayed now, the glass frame cool in his hands. He mounted it in the main lobby himself. No ceremony, no spotlight, just 4 words, etched in a silver plaque beneath the photo. She wasn't famous, but she's why I speak. No logo, no signature, just that. Later that week, an elderly customer, gray hair, shoulders slumped, eyes scanning the aisles with that uncertain look of someone unsure if he still belongs, stepped into the Atlanta store. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, and before he could even take a second step, a young employee in a bright blue vest approached him. With no pitch, no clipboard, no rehearsed smile. "Sir," she said gently, "can I help you find something?" Not, "What are you looking for?" Not, "Do you need anything?" Just a question dressed in respect. That was the shift, not in policy, but in posture. And when Raymond came in the following week, his usual Thursday visit, someone at checkout stood a little taller. Another nodded before he even reached the counter. And the store manager, without being told, stepped aside to open the door for him. No one had apologized to him in 1962. But now, in the way they moved, in the way they looked him in the eye, they were saying it, maybe not in words, but in something far more lasting. He never raised his voice. He didn't fire anyone. He just stood there, with a photograph, a memory, and a question that couldn't be ignored. Sometimes, the loudest change comes from the quietest room. And sometimes, it takes being invisible to remind the world who truly matters. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, a question, or even a quiet truth, please subscribe to Undercover Truths to walk with us through more untold journeys. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.